Go ahead, Irene.
Our mission, Helping Parents Heal, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents to become shining light parents by providing support and resources to aid in the healing process. We go a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and evidence for the afterlife in a non-dogmatic way. Affiliate groups welcome everyone, regardless of religious or non-religious background, and allow for open dialogue. Attendance today at this meeting is voluntary, and we are here for the benefit of learning from and sharing with other parents whose child has passed away. It is understood that our discussions are intended to be confidential and not designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers to allow parents to be informed about many possible ways to heal and to connect with their children and to learn about the afterlife. The views expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect those of Helping Parents Heal, and we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. And I just want to say a big thank you to Dr. Hone. I found her book, What Abby Taught Us, and it had a profound effect on my grief journey. So it's really very special to have you here speaking to our group tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Irene. So now I still have to introduce you before we get started. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. So first of all, I also want to say that you've had a profound effect on my healing, and I was very fortunate to be able to correspond with you early on. Let me go ahead and just tell a little bit about what you've done, but also I want to tell people here that you're an incredible public speaker, and I'm sure that so many of you have listened to TED Talks. I'm sure many of you have listened to Dr. Hone's TED Talks as well. So let's go ahead and I'll introduce you. While there are many resilience researchers in the world, the death of her 12-year-old daughter in a tragic road accident makes Dr. Lucy Hone's story quite unique. She writes books, academic articles, and blogs to spread her insights far and wide. Co-director of the New Zealand Institute of Wellbeing and Resilience, an adjunct fellow at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand. Hone's research is published internationally, and her PhD was acknowledged for its outstanding contribution to well-being science at the World Congress of Positive Psychology in 2019. Her best-selling book, Resilient Grieving, associated online training courses, Coping with Loss, a practical guide for helping professionals, and Insight Timer, plus her hugely popular TED Talk, 3 Secrets of Resilient People, have brought her fresh approach to grief to the global audience. Hone's work has been featured in several documentaries by the BBC, Swedish Television, The Bolt Report Australia, and TVNZ. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Lucy Hone.
Kia ora koutou, as we say down here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's great to be with you today, and I do, a variety of work nowadays, quite a lot in the education sector, and it's reasonably rare for me to be in a virtual room with, I'm guessing, so many parents who have had to endure the loss of a child and the impact on their lives, like you all have. So I'm going to start by taking a deep breath and saying to all of you, that I honor your babies and the journey and life that you've been forced to lead, and that you've found each other to make that healing more purposeful and meaningful, I hope, for you all. So, firstly, get it on the right side. My heart goes out to you all. Please, I want to acknowledge that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know that we had some different questions that we can go back and forth and ask each other. I just want to say that it is so wonderful to have a fellow parent on this Zoom meeting that we have, because we have presenters from all different professions, and you truly get it. And you have moved forward and have been able to heal so beautifully. And so one of the first things that I hope that you'll tell us is a little bit about your journey, about Abby as well, and about how you started in this, because you already had been researching all of this beforehand, and then how it helped you to understand and to be able to help others later on.
Yes, thanks, Elizabeth. So I think the real thing for me is that I had been researching resilience and resilience psychology, that whole field, for some time when Abby died in 2014. So I had traveled to America to do my master's with at the University of Pennsylvania, with the team that at the time was acknowledged as being the leading academic department globally for resilience research, but also for resilience programs, which was why I was so interested in them, because I guess, like all of you, we have that in common, that you want to turn your curiosity and thinking into action, don't you? I'm picking that you all feel that, to help others. And so I became curious about resilience back in 2008, and that curiosity led me to Philadelphia in 2009 to enroll on the resilience master's program they had then, which is called the Masters in Applied Positive Psychology. Positive psychology is wellbeing science and resilience research. It's not called positive because it's about being positive, because as we all know, you can't be positive all the time, nor would you want to be positive all the time. It's actually only called positive psychology because it's referring to the fact that traditional psychology has been about curing sickness and pathology and dysfunction. So basically, business as usual, traditional psychology is in some ways about negative functioning, getting people from -5 up to 0, back to kind of par. And in the early years of the 21st century, Professor Martin Seligman realized that getting to 0, to kind of just par, isn't actually good enough. You know, if we really want to protect ourselves against mental illness, and we want to live fulfilled, psychologically flourishing lives, we need to be on the positive side of the mental health balance sheet. So we need to go from -2 to +3 or +5, which is the only reason that field is called positive psychology. So I think that is a really important point to make here, that there is a scientific field of inquiry that looks into the ways of thinking and acting, the environments that help us thrive psychologically. So that is why it's called positive psychology, but it isn't just about being happy or being positive all the time. As a field, it fully acknowledges that a fulfilled, meaningful life involves suffering, and how do we cope with adversity when it strikes. So I traveled there in 2009, and I did commute, that crazy long kind of 30-hour commute from Christchurch, New Zealand, up to Philadelphia once a month, which was, which actually, I'm a complete learning junkie. So for me, it was just complete buzz, and it was a luxurious, amazing, really fulfilling time for me. And I'd done my training, and I'd come back to Christchurch at the end of 2010, just as our first earthquake hit. Christchurch hasn't been an earthquake city. You know, I'm not in LA. I'm not in one of those places where you actually do kind of live with the threat of earthquakes. The last big seismic event here was in 16,000 years ago. So what happened in February 2011, just as I had embarked on my doctoral research, a really massive earthquake hit us, causing 195 deaths. It shut down our central city for 18 months, and we lost 70% of our downtown buildings, to give you some idea of how huge it was. And anyone who has lived with earthquakes will know that you don't just get one event. I thought you did. Not true. You get, you know, harrowing subsequent aftershocks that can go on for a couple of years. In fact, we woke up with an earthquake this morning at 6:28 a.m. Wasn't too bad, but you know, they don't go away now. So this has really ignited my interest in resilience psychology. So that's the kind of the context and the backdrop of then losing Abby in 2014. And she was killed alongside her 12-year-old best friend, Ella, and Ella's mum, the beautiful, gorgeous, amazing Sally Summerfield, who was one of my dear friends. And so we lost all three of them in, you know, a moment of motorized madness, which I'm sure some of you will also know of. And somebody went through a stop sign and crashed into their car at 100 kilometers an hour and killed all three of them. So I guess my work is kind of my position, and as you said, Elizabeth, what I bring to this work is somewhat unique in that I've done this, you know, resilience training. I was trained by the best in the world, and then I came back to Christchurch and then did the professional application. You know, then it was my time in that post-earthquake period to work out which bits of this resilience psychology are useful to people when they are trying to rebuild their lives. So I lived through trauma, but we had kept our house. And so it was a sort of almost like a vicarious, you know, resilience moment for me. And then, of course, I get the personal smash to the head that you've all had, where your life is turned upside down, and my role was turned upside down. So suddenly what happened to me was that I had all the bereavement resources, literature, and experts in my world, and I was appalled to discover how, what a victimology would be my phrase, what a victimology that bereavement, field of bereavement was at the time. So this is back in 2014. I'm pleased to say it has changed a bit, but back then we were told within, really I think within about 3 days, that we were now prime candidates for divorce, mental illness, and family estrangement, and victim support. Yeah, I hate to identify anyone, but somebody did come and tell us, you know, to expect to write off 5 years of our lives to grief. Meanwhile, I'm standing in the kitchen with a 14 and 15-year-old boy in front of me who seemed to be my purpose for living. And I just think I cannot afford to take 5 years out of my life. These are going to be the most precious 5 years in our family life. And I am going to fight as hard as I can to try and maintain mainly functioning. You know, I wasn't trying to push away grief, but I was lucky enough to have this incredible toolkit at my fingertips. You know, I had been trained in all the ways of thinking and acting that enable us to cope with adversity in healthy ways, that they don't numb the grief, they don't take it away, but they give you the best chance of coming back from trauma and adversity. So I just became completely fixated and determined to work out what would it look like if I took my field of positive psychology and all that resilience literature and all the science that showed the ways of thinking and acting that helped people adapt to potentially traumatic events, and I applied it to this context of bereavement, which, you know, pretty much unbelievably no one really had done, which is, I would say, is academic negligence. And I also think that it is typical of academia that good old bereavement research in its ivory tower here didn't want to talk to positive psychology in its ivory tower over here, because that might be slightly kind of newfangled thinking. And I've discovered some pretty horrific academic negligence in my research, such as that actually as parents who have lost a child, we are not more likely to get divorced. You know, that was just completely inaccurate. And then I discovered that the 5 stages of grief, there's no empirical evidence for them whatsoever. And then I discovered that most of the research that had been done on bereavement had actually been conducted on people that have been diagnosed with complicated grief, meaning that they were really experiencing chronic, long-term outcomes that were interfering with their ability to function in the world. This is actually only 10% of bereaved. And so the picture of bereaved that is given to the world is, wow, you're gonna, you know, this is really gonna derail you. These are the 5 stages of grief. This is what's gonna happen to you. And I just remember thinking, that's all too passive for me. I want to be an active participant in my grief process. I want to know that I'm doing everything I possibly can to give me and us the best chances of survival and coming back. So yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying where I'm coming from, Elizabeth.
That's beautiful. And I think that it would just be so wonderful if you could go into your beautiful book, Resilient Grieving, and especially what you've expressed in TED Talks and all over about those 3 important tools that you have realized they helped you, and they can help all of us, not even if we are bereaved parents. If you're experiencing any kind of loss or any kind of tragedy. And I love hearing you talk about those. Could you say something about those 3 to our parents?
Yeah, absolutely, I can. So I think the first thing I need to say to you is that in this field, I haven't written 2 books. I've written 1 book that originally was called What Abby Taught Us in New Zealand, and then was rebranded as Resilient Grieving when it went out to the global market. I can't even really remember why that was. I mean, I think What Abby Taught Us is a very apt title, and I'm sure you would all agree that one of the great healing strategies for us all is to acknowledge that that child has taught us so much about life. And so for me, that is that journey of what did her presence, she was 12 years old, her presence in my life, how has it shaped me? How has it changed me? What has having her, losing her, taught us all? And then that is such, as you all know, that's such an ongoing journey and learning for us all. But when the book went out into the world, it seemed more sensible just to call it Resilient Grieving, and I wanted people to understand that it was less of a personal memoir and more of a kind of a guide to some of the ways of thinking and acting that resilience psychology has identified as being helpful when we're trying to adapt to adversity. So the first thing that really strikes me is that to understand that there are ways of thinking and acting that can help us at this time and to put us in the driver's seat. And so I had that training and understood that, but I think sadly too few people understand that they actually can have an influence over the way they think, and that having an influence over the way you think changes how you feel and how you function. So, and that's not always easy, is it, everyone? So first up for me, I knew because of my training to be really careful where I focused my attention. And so, as I say, when we were told to write off 5 years of our life to Abby's loss, I remember thinking, choose life, not death. Don't lose what you have to what you have lost. And I had 2 beautiful boys, you know, standing in the kitchen in front of me. I kind of laugh now because they're not quite as beautiful nowadays at 22 and 20 as horrible grubby students as they used to be when they were teenagers. But they're sort of, you know, they're just, anyway, they're growing up. But at the time, I knew I had a big influence on how I could protect them and how I could nurture them through this path, this journey, and I could help them by, and I don't want to say by being strong, because actually resilience isn't about being strong. It's about understanding that we are all vulnerable and that everybody struggles and suffers. And my other strategy that I was trained in, which I relied on all the time, is just to ask myself, is the way I'm thinking or acting helping or harming me in my quest to get through this, to survive Abby's loss? To mainly function was my goal at the time. And so involved in that is an understanding that this doesn't mean I'm going to leap out of bed in the morning every day and say, woohoo, you know, life's awesome, because it wasn't like that at all. But it was just always considering, am I giving myself the best chances of survival? And we see this from the literature, that the studies show that the people who exhibit resilience, you know, who really do manage to act in a way that fosters resilience, very often do have some kind of sort of survivor's mission. And I know for me, I was on a survivor's mission. And so I was willing to do anything I could to help us all survive. And that was very much about being careful with the people I hung out with, the reading I did, the things that people said to me. I'm sure you've all got friends who have been great friends all your life, but not quite so handy when it comes to grief. You know, they've said the wrong thing. And actually it's better to just park. I was going to say part with that friendship, but maybe we should just say park that friendship temporarily, because there might come a time when it works out again. But to understand that not everyone's going to help you through this journey. And some people will get your path more than others, and you will make new friends and relationships because of how that death has changed you. So there are an awful lot of strategies, and one of the things I feel quite strongly about, and is now backed up in the literature, is that there's no one way to grieve. You all know that because you've no doubt been told that 100 times, and that grief is as individual as your own finger thumbprint, but also that there are ways of thinking and acting and environments that help us navigate that loss. But critically, it's really important to understand that what works for me and what works for Elizabeth might be different to what works for Irene and Debbie and Joan here. So all of us have to find your own ways of thinking and acting, your own support systems that enable you to get through this terrible time and the subsequent years and decades since. And so in my book, I refer to this as a jigsaw, because to me it is, you know, a kind of jigsaw of a whole lot of different ways of thinking and acting that help me through. But because I'm a scientist, I guess I realize that what works for me might not work for you. So here are all the strategies in my book that have been supported by good, robust science. Give them a go. Be your experiment, you know, your own personal experiment of one. See what works for you, what language resonates with you, what ideas resonate with you, and make it a personal survival mission.
Sorry, I don't know why I have a call coming into my computer and I don't even know where it's coming from. It won't even show me. I've never had that happen before. I'm terribly sorry about that. Trying to stop it. But in the meantime, I wanted to ask you if in Australia and New Zealand, there are good support systems for parents that aren't necessarily through therapy or counseling. Are there any groups that you know of that parents can attend? Because I've had a lot of people, we have a lot of parents in Australia and in New Zealand. We have some affiliates starting over there. But I would really like to know just in general, if you work hand in hand with any bereavement support groups for specifically parents. Is that something that you have any recommendations about?
I have worked with SANS, which is sudden infant loss. And there are certainly SANS groups all over New Zealand, and I'm sure Australia too. I don't know of any specifically about parents. And this is really, Elizabeth, why I wrote the book, because I'm a writer. So writing the book was my own form of healing too. And a very obvious move for me. It definitely helped me. And I became very quickly aware that if I could make Abby's life count for something by helping others, that was a way to help my own grief journey. But the lack of information and support groups is really one of the reasons that we're doing the work that we do now. So we're currently filming for a new online course about coping with loss. And that we're doing 2 versions of that. And one is for all of the helping professionals who, of course, are there to help and support all diverse forms of bereaved people. But I'm horrified to discover that in so much of graduate education, they're still, and in health professional education, they're still being taught about the 5 stages of grief. So if you ask most helping professionals about grief, they'll tell you about the 5 stages, which is, just not good enough. And as I'm sure some of you will recognize, knowing about the 5 stages is worse than not good enough. It's actually injurious to some people. You don't go through those phases, and then you think there's something wrong with you.
It's actually the 5 stages of dying that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had named it. And so it has nothing to do with the 5 stages of grief. And nobody should have to believe that they're going to go through those and that they have to experience all of those before they can heal, because everyone heals on their own timetable. And also some parents are there quicker than others. But we have a lot of questions in the sidebar. Is it possible for me to, and actually just things that people have written. Jo G is here from New Zealand, and she says, Kia ora. Hi, Lucy from Ohakune, New Zealand. Your book, Resilient Grieving, has been instrumental in my grief journey. Thank you so much. I have copies that I now give to others in their grief with the hope that they too will find it helpful in their pain and overwhelm. I am so grateful. Thank you. I am so sorry for your loss, and I am in awe of your work honoring your love and loss of Abby and all of your family. Your book has certainly given my heart warmth and some hope in surviving this new life with grief and all of its emotions. Thank you. So that's just goodness, we have somebody who's on here with us. Let's see, make sure that your microphones are muted, everyone. I thought that they were. Okay.
Funny, I will probably have to mute my microphone in a moment, because I can see one of my dogs is revving up to start barking and try and leave the room. So if I exit stage left or right, I'll only be letting him out.
That's fine. This is what Zoom meetings are like. It's not a problem.
Hey, Elizabeth, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
Any, or Irene, or any of you really, about what have you found that has been helpful from helping professionals and what is less helpful?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that. I think that in our group, we spend a lot of time using different healing modalities. So we don't necessarily concentrate on therapists or on psychiatrists or people. There are many very, very good therapists, but we use things like Reiki, yoga, we use energy healing, we use a lot of different things that maybe don't exist in other groups, as well as therapists. One of our hugest supporters is David Kessler, and he's spoken to our group many times, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he just wrote a book called The Sixth Stage of Grief. He's a huge friend of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's, and it's kind of tongue-in-cheek because she knows about the title. She knew about it before she passed, and this stage of grief is helping others. So that was kind of explaining that that's one of the ways that the best way to heal is to be able to help others. But we are able to move forward and heal through a lot of different as I say, healing modalities, but also understanding that we have a connection with our kids in spirit. And so one of the things that we do is to learn to connect with them. We feel that they are as close to us as they were before they passed, that they're just a heartbeat away. We feel like they walk along this path with us, and they're with us every step of the way. And we also feel that they're home and we're still in school. So what we do is different than a lot of other groups, because most bereavement groups will not allow you to talk about anything about that connection that exists with our kids, and mostly just talk about the moment that they passed. I mean, I find that a lot of grief groups kind of get stuck there instead of moving forward and finding that relationship. We also, as I know that you also believe, we are never getting over it because they are with us. So we don't feel like that's an important part of our journey to get over it. And we feel very grateful because we've had so many people help us along the way. Again, we have David Kessler, we have Dr. Eben Alexander, Dr. Raymond Moody, Bill Guggenheim, a lot of experts in after-death communication as well as near-death experiences who talk to our group as well. So it's a little bit different. It's not quite as research-based as what you're doing, although a lot of the research that all of these people like Raymond Moody, Eben Alexander is pretty important. We have people who have come to speak about the Shared Crossing Project, which is in Santa Monica. It's at UC Santa Monica. And this is about parents who experienced the same thing that I actually had happen, experiencing the crossing of our child together with them, but in a beautiful way. And so those are some of the healing modalities that we use. But I would love for Irene to tell you a little bit about her own journey, because I'm just one of many people in this group, obviously.
Well, Lucy, when you speak of how professional help, I found that one of the biggest help, other than finding the support group and finding my tribe and having other people to talk to, was I experienced a lot of trauma associated with my daughter's death from cancer. And I think trauma in grief is very much underlooked or not researched. And PTSD, I believe that many of us suffer from PTSD. And for myself, until I dealt with the post-traumatic stress disorder, I was not able to move forward in my healing. And I think that is very much underlooked in the grieving process.
Yeah, so I'm pulling this up here. Great book, treating traumatic bereavement.
Mhm.
This is in one of the authors is Camille Wortman, who I did some collaboration in my book. And the most important really aspect of that is just what you've said, Irene, is that if you have a traumatic bereavement, you need to understand that you've got both trauma and bereavement going on. And the healing process is for those two things are in different, they're different in different places. So any amount of grief counseling won't be sufficient if you're not, as you've just said, dealing with the trauma.
Yeah,
So
I would experience those, I'd call them groundhog moments, where I would just over and over again exasperate and just go over certain moments in her treatment, in her passing. And once I dealt with the trauma, it took the charge out of those moments. They're still there and there's sadness associated with them, but there's not that feeling that I can't go forward from it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I realized because we've had quite a few events in Christchurch. So we had just last March the 15th, we had that terrible mosque shooting where we had 51 people killed. And that, it's just 10 minutes down the road. And every child in Christchurch was then in lockdown in school, the whole city. And lots of the children watched that event on their phone because he filmed it. And so I realized when those, because of the earthquakes, because of Abby's loss, because, the policeman came to see us, just like you, some of you, I'm sure, that comes out of the blue, that trauma. I realize I still have some post-traumatic symptoms, and they only really resurface when something suddenly happens. So my sister then was caught in another earthquake, completely unrelated, about 2.5 years ago. And the whole thing just kind of spiked again. But as long as I'm aware of it and I realize it's going to happen for a couple of days and I put my strategies in place, then that seems to be enough for me. So I think my point here is that for some of us, even after treatment, you can still have some symptoms, but if you are able to go about living your lives and functioning in a healthy way, you can live with those symptoms. But if they are impeding your functioning, it is really important to get help, because it's just tragic to live like that. And you can, with the correct help, and I love that you as a group are embracing so many different forms of help. And that goes back to that jigsaw theory again, that we have lots of different ways to help us navigate loss, and we all really just have to work out what works for us.
Well, I also just want to say that a lot of people in the sidebar are explaining meditation in many forms. Obviously, that's something, a lot of meditation, pranic healing, walking, mediums as well, meditation, let's see, and then learning our new relationship with our children. And then one of the things that Jean is saying is that every other group she's joined, and I guess I was trying to express this, has been focused on grieving. I'm so happy to have found Helping Parents Heal and learning to continue the journey spiritually with my son, Sean. So I think that that is what separates us from other groups, is that we truly believe that it's possible to heal. And actually, we call ourselves Shining Light Parents because instead of bereaved parents, because bereaved is one of the saddest words in the dictionary. And so I think that there are so many things that need to be done as well alongside the different things that we offer. Someone also wrote EMDR therapy, and I'm not sure if that's something that you do over in New Zealand, but I know that Irene also had EMDR, I believe, didn't you? And it was very helpful to her. And I know a lot of other people who are dealing with trauma have been able to go through that and have received help that way as well. So it's a difficult journey, but as Irene said, and I think that this is probably one of the biggest things about Helping Parents Heal, is finding your tribe, and knowing that everybody in it understands and is walking that same path. And that some of the people are a little bit further down the road, and we have caring listeners who are a little bit farther down, and they reach a hand back and they help other parents forward. So anyway, but
Yeah.
there are also other questions here.
I was just going to say something about meditation, actually. That
okay, sure.
Some people kind of think that meditation kind of freaks them out. You know, that just the word meditation, or they think it's really kind of woo-woo. And so I like the fact that someone here has put meditation in its many forms. So whether that is you going for a walk, or whether that's you knitting, or cooking a meal and really following a recipe and just being present in that moment. Sometimes I think it's helpful for people to understand that there are two distinct forms of mindfulness. One is informal, and that is those things I've just been talking about, you know, going for a walk, just trying to stay really present in this moment and in a non-judgmental way. And then the other is actually meditating. And then even within meditation, you know, you can use an app like Insight Timer, you could use a bell, you could look at a candle. There are so many different ways to do it. So I think in my work, in our work, we find that language gets in the way of lots of people trying lots of these things. So, you know, there are many people who get spooked by the idea of meditation because, for whatever reason. And I think it is really important to, even if we're talking about gratitude or benefit finding or spirituality, to find the way, the language that resonates with you is really important. Because somebody, you know, once said to me, personally, I don't really like the idea of a random act of kindness is one of the interventions that has been scientifically tested. And I love the idea of kindness. And I absolutely believe that kindness heals, and that doing small things, you know, being kind to people in small ways really does have that ripple social emotional contagion effect. And it is so powerful. But just don't ask me to participate in a random acts of kindness week, because that kind of invalidates it all for me. So it's a good example of how, you know, the language around this science can really tune you out and turn you off. Don't let it, you know, just to me, just kindness, pretty big in kindness. And in New Zealand over the COVID period, you know, we loved the fact that our Prime Minister just kept telling us to be kind. Just we're pretty lucky on that front, I feel. So yeah, and I'm loving some of these comments here that doing things that honor my son's life bring me joy. Thank you, Sandra, for sharing that. And I think that is so true, you know, honoring Abby, thinking about her. Something happened today and I thought that was very Abby. I've forgotten what it was, but yeah, it's just knowing that they're still part of your life. I mean, boy, thank goodness the research has changed, because we used to be told, you know, 30 years ago that you would have to sever your attachment with the dead, and that was the healthy way to grieve. And at least we know now that that is not a healthy way to grieve. You know, I've got friends on the other side of the world I haven't seen for 20 or 30 years. They're still friends. So what is the difference between that and my daughter, who I've not seen for 5 or 6 years now? So I think it's really, really critical thinking that, to realize that you can still love that person who you've lost, and that they are still part of your life. The way you act, the way you feel, the way you behave, and the priorities you place onto your life as well. So working out what their legacy is, I think, is a really beautiful thing to do. What did they teach you? How did they shape you? In what ways have they, what gifts have they given you? So yeah, for me, that's really powerful and definitely healing.
Well, I love that you use so many modalities as well, and realizing that enormous gift that Abby gave you and that you're carrying forward for her. And I was wondering, Sangeeta is asking a question that you kind of answered earlier when you were speaking, but she is saying how to deal with friends and relatives who don't extend a helping hand during the grief process when you need them most. And I know that you did say that some of them you have to park, but do you have any other suggestions, especially family? I think it's harder with family than it is with friends because you see them more often.
I think family's just hard, full stop. We've been laughing because we've just been away on holiday for a week with our boys who are 20 and 22. And I said to my husband when we returned, I said, isn't it funny how your holiday never lives up to the fantasy in your head before you go away? So firstly, we're very lucky that we are free enough to go, albeit within New Zealand, but we did, we're allowed to travel around and all be together. So that was great. But it is funny. I think our expectations of get in the way. And I like Brene Brown's, her advice is to work out who are the people whose opinion really counts to you. And she would say, put those names down on a very small business size card type of piece of paper, put that in your wallet and know that those are the people whose opinions you really care about, and let the rest go. Because again, that it comes back to that question of, is the way I'm thinking or acting helping or harming me? And only focusing your attention on the things that you can control, and somehow working determinedly really hard to accept the things that you can't control. Because focusing your attention on the people that are beyond your control will only wind you up and make you frustrated and cross. And so then you're harming yourself. And for all of us, we need every helping hand we can get. So I think, that to me is, I just come back to that question all the time, is the way I'm thinking or acting helping or harming me in my quest to get through this? So whether that's looking, late night at photos of Abby, whether it's looking on Instagram and seeing all the 18-year-old girls of her age, on their summer vacation, or whether it is of family members' behavior that's really frustrating me, I just come back to, really, is it helping or harming you? Focusing your attention on this, try and divert your attention elsewhere. And sometimes that involves me doing engaging activities, something that really absorbs your attention. Sometimes that involves me picking up the phone and ranting to a friend about somebody else's behavior, whatever works for you.
That's beautiful. And it's a very good, I love the whole thing about putting those pieces of paper in your wallet and just deciding that you're going to worry about what those people think and no one else. Carol is saying, I'd love Lucy's opinion on this, please. I've been told by more than 2 doctors that people who had a child pass due to overdose suffer with complicated grief. Part of the reason is that when the child is still alive, but in active addiction, that causes major trauma before they leave for heaven. Do you have any thoughts on that?
My only thought on that, I'm sorry, just reading that now, is I don't know the research on that, but I have, in my own research, discovered that there's a lot of doctors and health professionals out there who know very little about grief, and that they are passing on doctrine that they were taught in medical school 10, 20, 30 years ago, and it might not be accurate. And so if you know anybody who's at all able to look at academic research, I would suggest you can go on yourself onto Google Scholar, so you can access pretty much all research papers, the vast majority on Google Scholar. Good old Google, giving us something else to look at. And you'd want to put in there, you'd want to search complicated grief in quotation marks, and then put and addiction. And I would think you would find some research in there. You probably do need a pretty good critical researcher, someone just to have a look at it for you. But I'd investigate that before you take it as your path. And then the other thing is, even if that science is true, there are always outliers. And what worries me about these kind of predictions is that they're not ever true for everyone. And so if you don't be bogged down by that, and find your own path.
Well, that's beautiful. Rosie is saying, always keeping my son alive through his sport legacy. Giving back to the community helps me so much. 4 months after his accident, I was unable to sleep, eat, breathe. It was horrible, but one step at a time. I lived through him and his memories and how he lived his life, never backing down. Now, after I've learned to change the sadness to gratefulness for having him here with us for 21 years, and still through spirit, I can breathe again. Don't get me wrong, I'm still struggling, but I am functioning somehow. I have also learned that positive ripple things are the only ones that belong in my life. Love you for sharing. I love the way you think. So just, that's not a question, but I think that's beautiful.
Thank you, Rosie.
Yeah, and Rosie's such a sweetheart too. All of our parents are too. Jody's saying that was good advice. My family has not been there for her since her son passed, and even commented on her grief, I guess, which is really, really hard. I mean, I think that family gatherings are always difficult, and I've always wanted to lift a glass to Morgan and toast him. And I know that it makes my relatives many times uncomfortable, but I always say to everyone in this group, they're uncomfortable for 5 minutes and we're uncomfortable for much longer than that. So why not just allow them to indulge us for those 5 minutes?
Yeah, I feel the same about at the beginning, people would say, which you'll all know, when people say to you, how many children have you got? And I used to agonize over, well, you know, do we say 3 and 1 died, or what do we do? And exactly that was my thinking around that. Okay, well, if I've had to make them uncomfortable, these strangers who have asked me that on the beach, who I'll probably never see again, well, that was them uncomfortable for a brief moment. And I'm not ready to disinherit my daughter, you know, and I'm sure you've all had those conversations too.
And you shouldn't have to. There's no reason that we shouldn't be able to talk to people about our kids. And again, if they're uncomfortable for a few minutes, we're uncomfortable for a lot longer than that, and it's okay. Let's see, Justine is saying, curious about the resilience and well-being program that you teach there in New Zealand. What an important thing to teach in schools. Can you share a little bit about the program and how it works?
Yeah, so we have been working for about 5 years now in schools, and the first thing we learned is that there isn't a program and that every school is different. And so really what we do is training with the teachers and the people who are in charge of taking wellbeing and resilience seriously in each school, and there are a growing breed of these people. We work with them for them to understand all the ways, all the processes that have to be put in place for wellbeing to really be at the core of a school. So we are watching schools shift pretty fast now, in that occasionally, and I know in America it is mandated to teach social and emotional learning in schools in very few hours, in very kind of, you know, limited fashion. So you might have 3 periods a week where the skills of social and emotional learning are taught. What we know from the research is that that's not sufficient to actually really train people to understand resilience and to call upon their resilience when they need to. And it's not enough when schools are just set up around education, academic achievement, that's a pretty narrow remit. I mean, if I ask you all now to type in what you most want for your children, give it in one word, tell me, type into the chat, what do you want for your children? What do you hope for your children? That they'll be, I'll just wait and let you just, yeah, you want them to have love, happiness, happy, kindness, yeah, all of those things, okay? So we often do this in our training, and then we laugh and we say, yeah, and what do schools teach them? None of those things. Schools teach, you know, geometry and and those things are important, but actually to survive and thrive in the 21st century, you have to really understand curiosity and creativity and gratitude and resilience and hope and all of these things, and how you can build them in yourselves and others. And so there is definitely a way to teach resilience in schools, and globally we see that's happening a lot more now through those kind of social emotional learning programs. But you can't just teach that in 3 programs a week and then run a school system that actually cripples well-being, because it's all about grades and all about results, and maybe that your race is completely unrecognized and unvalidated, your beliefs, your customs, your cultural values. So we talk about whole school well-being, and what are the systems and processes and teaching practices that you have to put in place to set up a school in a way that actually it really, really puts well-being at the core. So I've written another book, which honestly, I didn't even plan this, but because I wasn't thinking I was going to talk to you about this, but this is The Educator's Guide to Whole School Wellbeing that it's just coming out really now. And we've been talking, I did a webinar this morning at 8 a.m. with a school in Philadelphia who are really trying to take wellbeing seriously. And we work internationally with all sorts of schools just to help them. Mainly we wrote the book rather like the Resilient Grieving book, because if we want to make the world a better place, we want people to understand this well-being and psychology around resilience. So if you put it in a book for whatever this is, $30, it's a lot cheaper than me flying to the States and working with you. So so books are the way that we work, and then we run conferences and other things as well. But online training, if you really are interested, we are going to, because we care about the environment and we want to stop being on planes flying everywhere to do our face-to-face training, we're doing a lot more online training. So we're also taking this book online in by September this year. So that's
well, there are so many people who are interested in your book. And Justine is saying, first of all, she said, I'd love to bring this to the US. Can we reach out to your company about this? Will be so important, resilience through this pandemic. And this is not just about us. It's about, there's so much else going on in the world, obviously. I teach social emotional growth through music, but resilience is essential. Love what you're doing. And then she's so excited about the book. And other people are saying as well that she's going to share it with her districts. It is something that's so important. And is there any way that we can find out about the seminars that you're going to be doing coming up? Are they available to people in the States and in other countries, in the UK, yes, Canada, and
so I just put the website on there. At the moment, that's the New Zealand Institute of Wellbeing and Resilience. That's the website for us. But we literally have got somebody who's joining us this week that's going to turn that into a global platform and decide on a global brand name, which will be enough to send us all into a tailspin. But if you go to NZIWR, or even if you email NZIWR and just ask the lovely Debs, who's our office manager, to put you on the mailing list, then you can find out more about, we'll release information about those programs then. So yeah, and this book, The Educator's Guide to Whole School Wellbeing, I'll put that in here as well. That's available in, online and at Amazon and all of those places. I'll just put that in. And that really is intended for anybody who is, who's in charge of promoting well-being within their school. And all of our schools now have well-being leads. So they have a teacher whose job it is to create and develop a comprehensive well-being strategy in the school.
That's wonderful. And, you know, I think it is something that we don't have enough of here in the States. I have a friend who goes from school to school here in Arizona, and she has a kindness project. And so she teaches kindness to kids. But this is in honor of her son as well. But nothing like this. And this is very exciting. And I know it's getting late. I don't know if you were able to stay longer than an hour. It's now 8 minutes after the hour.
I'm going to have to go. I'm
yes,
sorry.
Okay, I just wanted to wrap up then. Did you have any closing words you wanted to say? Or if not, what we do is we turn on all the mics and have everybody say thank you and goodbye. But in case everybody's saying thank you in the sidebar as well.
Thank you
all of you
so much.
Thank you.
People are unmuting. Thank you so much. This was
Thank
wonderful.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Great
you very
meeting.
much.
Thank you, Dr. Holm.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, so
Thank
glad
you.
everyone's here. We have a lot
Yes.
of meetings this week. Join us.
Thank you.
from New Zealand.
Thank